Escalation of disclosure. So we talk about table stakes. When you go through somewhere between when you initiate contact with a potential bidder and when you close, they're going to need to see, the winning bidder is going to need to see pretty much everything. Okay? They may even want to interview some of your key employees, pretty likely actually. They may want to interview some of your key customers. They may want to interview some of your key suppliers. Now, you may be in a position to flat out refuse that access, but there's a pretty good chance that that'll be to your detriment to refuse that access. So the question becomes, you go from the point where you have a very detailed, granular disclosure where someone knows everything about your business, to the front end of the process where you have an agent calling a potential bidder and saying something quite vague like, I'm working with a business services company with about this much in revenue and about this much profitability based in the GTA. Would you be interested in having a closer look? That sounds pretty harmless, okay? So there is the point here is that there's an escalation of disclosure as you move along through the process, and the question is, at what points and at what is the price of admission for each step in that disclosure? What do you need from the bidder to show them a little more? Okay, so it's very, very important to stage the disclosure when you're going through any kind of a sale process. But a competitive sale process is particularly good for this because you can actually enforce the deadlines. So with that, I think we're to you, Harry, to make any additional remarks.
Well, I think this is the part which is always the most fun, because you have to explain why all these people who are in these dark suits are coming to visit your office all the time, and you're going to maintain confidentiality. Yet, so I've played the role as a CRA auditor. I've worked for every bank in the country, because I have to go in and get access to information on like especially if it's on a sales mandate. Going to speak to whoever is now in our inner circle, but yet keep this completely confidential. And there really is an art to how to go about getting this information out there in a way that still protects confidentiality, but it shouldn't be so rigid that, that, okay, like we should be defensive about it. We have to be, your staff, your employees clearly understand that when they see people like me walk in, that this is not normal course. So when you go through this process, I like what you said, Paris, this no names, and obviously you have a different approach if you're going to financial buyers where you have to educate them on your business versus strategic buyers where you have to protect your business. I don't know if we're going to talk about it here, but I give a great example of where I was working for a buyer for a strategic, and he was keeping his cards very close to the vest. So all I asked him for, is it okay, if I have access to his GL? And I gave him, back then, I gave him a place to put it, with his CFO, and he said, sure. So he lost complete control of confidentiality of his information because we took every transaction in his GL for 3 years. And I apologize, I was working for the buyer. That's why you could hire me for the vendor, and I can protect you for that. But we were able to see everything that happened. So even though he thought, and we hadn't broken the terms of the deal, we just said, we need to do some limited examination. So it's really important to control and understand how your data is going to be exposed, whether it's in the early stages of the process or later on in a full diligence process. And I think, from my perspective, again, as an owner now of a business where I'm constantly looking at different businesses, I think you need to be aware of who we are and what this looks like to your people.
Yeah. I think it's a great, and on the GL, general ledger, for those of us who are not accountants, one thing when you get that general ledger, just to be clear for the non-accountants in the room, you got every transaction. You know who the main customers are, you know what they paid, you probably have some pricing information, you know how concentrated the customer base is, you've got it all at that point.
That you probably don't even know the information that we can take and manipulate. So we can, you may be looking at information for your own purposes at very high level. Once I have access to your GL and all the data fields, I can see profit by customer, by province, by, whatever, you name it, we get it. And that concept is surprising to many companies when they realize that we're going to show them data, we're going to show the buyer's data that even the vendor never even saw.
I guess I'd make a couple of observations on this. I think with the emergence of private equity over the last decade, I mean, this process has become a lot more sophisticated. You're not going to see suits come into the office as much. You'll probably do it at an off-site hotel. The plant tours are, people are told, don't wear suits. It's probably on the weekends, it's after hours. Having said that, as coy as you wish to be, all of the customers out there have dialogue with them. They know who's in town today and who's not in town. So as much as you try to get around that, the process is somewhat leaky. I want to take a couple of minutes on the virtual data room. In the old days, you used to have a bricks and mortar data room, literally like this, and everybody would traipse in and out. And now it's all electronic, and they can tell who's in, who's not in, how much resources you're allocating, and how serious certain bidders are versus other bidders. Like I've got an auction going right now, and the private equity group called me and said, look, I've got two bidders, one who's all over the data room and one who's not. The financial buyer is all over the data room, the strategic's not. What should I conclude from that? And I said, you shouldn't conclude anything, because the strategics don't necessarily do the same diligence. They know how this piece of the puzzle fits into their business. They'll do the heavy lifting when they know they're close to a deal. So it has got a lot more efficient, and certainly I think there's a number of things you can do to alleviate leaks and disclosure as part of this process.
Yeah, in the bad old days of the physical data rooms, you could actually see investment bankers and some pretty high-profile executives going up the elevator to Stikeman's office. And this afternoon, I saw Inco in there, and then I saw Falconbridge in the morning, and yeah, something's cooking over at Stikeman, right? And so, and people can tell things like the lights on late at night at Shell's office. They're never on late at night. They must be working on something. So people can surmise a lot when you got people moving around, going up and down elevators, visiting places. And so the virtual data room has really made that a lot easier. And the other thing that I'll mention is that it was around 2000, there was a major Canadian energy company that had a pretty controversial holding in Africa. The asset was worth close to $1 billion, and they wanted to sell the asset. And most of the potential bidders were national oil companies in Africa, the Middle East, and what have you, not the types of people that you usually see around Calgary, okay? So when we wanted to, and those are the bad old days when we didn't have virtual data rooms, we had a physical data room. So we actually rented some temporary space by the airport, had blinds put up all around all the windows and sealed the room off, had to get dedicated fax machines. Like I'm telling you, it was the bad old days, okay? We ended up setting things up so that the bidders could just come straight from the airport and wouldn't be going around downtown, because if you see, some of these were pretty high profile companies. So if you see some pretty senior executives from these national oil companies coming around, I think people could figure out pretty quickly what was going on. And we ran that process, no leaks whatsoever, okay? So if you manage it properly, you can certainly do it. And the other thing that we did in terms of the hotel example, again, we had a group of about, I don't know, as many as 40 people in for management presentations. We rented a hotel room by the airport, and of course we didn't say it was ABC Company. We called it the Smith Family Reunion, okay? And then you have all these people showing up for the family reunion in blue suits and what have you. So I think people figured it probably wasn't really a family reunion. But you can employ a lot of tactics, and we'll get into that in a minute. When you're trying to manage those management presentations and those site tours.
And one other thing with the virtual data room, and I've seen it where security getting in is so critical. One of the things that we had when it was initially set up was they used the same standard for the username. It was initial and then last name, and everybody had the same initial password. And it was easy, and we had some security issues because of it. And it was just not having that extra layer of security. It's essential. And thinking about those little details, and don't give the opportunity for people to be a sleuth.
And also staging the customer, I think for most buyers, customer reaction to a change in ownership is going to be critical to getting a deal done. It's also the most disruptive thing you could ever do, is have a customer impacted by a deal that may never take place. So staging when the customer is actually going to be spoken to and which customers, and that's that in itself is it has its own negotiating timeline, and it's not in a virtual data room. Like, no buyer that I've ever met is going to accept, a data about a key customer. They're going to want to speak to them, and like I said, that's something usually done in the last 48 hours of a deal.
Yeah. From a teaser perspective as well, it's really critical that your people look at it. Your people within your core team, they look at it, and they really look at it with the lens. Could somebody within the industry speculate that it's us? And could our employees, if our employees saw that, could they get it? That's look at it from that lens. That's incredibly important.
And especially if you're in a niche business.
Yeah.
It doesn't take.
Yeah, it's so true.
It's a small market in Canada, and it doesn't take long to decipher who this is.
And the last thing you want is one of your employees walking into your office with the teaser in their hand.
We've seen that happen.
Yeah.
So it's important to not, and our advice is always, when you're at the teaser, don't put the name of the company, only very, very general information, so at the very, very least you have plausible deniability if it should come back. And what's really, really dangerous these days with email is that, of course, once you hit send on that, you've lost all control of where that document goes. So that's a real problem. So what do you do? Okay, so there are a couple ways you can actually manage that. You can actually open your data room earlier and give people access to the teaser on the data room. They log on, they take a look at the teaser, and as soon as they pass, you shut it off. Okay, so you can do that. That's a pretty elaborate way of handling it. The other way you can do it is you can watermark the teaser. Okay, we always do this. Okay, when we send a teaser out to Mr. Sam Smith at ABC Company, the teaser says Sam Smith ABC Company. Okay, so we're going to know who leaked it if it comes back around, right? That tends to put a damper on throwing the teaser around. Okay, so there are things that you can do to manage the way that the way that the information is passed around. Okay, so the teaser is important. And the other thing is the no names canvas. We just went through a process with for a manufacturing company based here in the GTA. We called 250 private equity funds. About 92% of them were in the US. Of those companies, every single one of them, we spoke to them first. I didn't send them any information. What we did is we said, okay, here are the rough parameters around the company. Is this roughly of interest? We were able to eliminate about half the list, about 125 of those names, just by the verbal qualification. Nothing's been sent. Okay. And then we narrowed. Then that was sort of the price admission to even get a teaser. Okay. Then once we got a teaser, we sent that out to about 125 parties. Then after that, if they liked the teaser, they signed a non-disclosure agreement, and they got a book. Okay. So they got a confidential information memorandum on which to base a non-binding bid. One problem that we ran into, one challenge, is that if we really wanted to maintain strict confidentiality for our client, and we send over a teaser without the name of the company, and we send as well an NDA to sign, and our client is a party to the NDA, so their name might not be in. Maybe we put I've seen people send a no-names teaser and then have the name of their client in the NDA. That didn't really kind of have the desired effect, okay? Or the other thing you can do is you can leave the name of your client out, but then just before you're about to sign the agreement, you got to put the client's name in. So what if it's a competitor and they say, oh, it's those guys, I'm not interested, and they don't sign the NDA? Now you got a problem. So how do you manage that? One is to not call them. You don't call that bidder, you don't let them know about the process, but any other ideas on how you might handle that? Curtis, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's not uncommon, especially if you're running a process, to send out the NDAs without names, because there's a period of negotiation with all the parties. And so, is that going to take a few days or a few weeks? and you effectively clean the slate. So all of the NDAs are on the shelf, ready to go. The teaser's been circulated, and now you're ready to implement, and you do it all in one step. Ultimately, there is a little bit of a leap of faith at some point that you've got to get to the next level.
Yeah, we figured out a way
Yeah,
to
one of-
bridge that entirely.
I think just one on the NDA side, I know we're talking a lot about confidentiality, but part of the NDA is also going to be access to people. And I know that for us, non-solicitation is key of our key members. So it's not just confidentiality. That agreement can also be used, and Curtis is the expert here.
I mean, look, it's great to say you know who the buyer is, but you don't know who the buyer is. So typically the NDAs or the CAs that are going out are a bit more comprehensive, and they're going to assume that everybody's got some kind of competing interest, whether it's a strategic or a private equity group with a portfolio company. And so we are going to look at some key business items. And this is sort of goes back to my initial comments that you have to make sure you spend some time on the CA. And if there's a broken deal or you don't sell the company, you want to make sure your key talent can't be picked off by any of the prospective bidders. You're not going to put in the data room competitively sensitive information out of the gate. You're going to hold that back to the end to make sure you've got a deal with a particular party. And so there's a number of those business considerations. You know, at the outset, who gets to be in the group to get confidential information? You know, you tend to see buyers now make a real big group. It's my lawyers, it's my accountants, it's my lenders if there's going to be a leverage buyout scenario. Oh, by the way, I'm bringing in co-investors too. I want them in the group. Where does it end? So we try to, you know, as a seller, you want to restrict this group, and then on your consent at various intervals, let others into the receiving party category.
That's a really good point. When you get into really large deals where you see a lot of consortium bidding, and I don't know if it's going to apply to a lot of people in this audience, but the agent really wants to control clubbing among the potential bidders. So there will actually be anti-collusion or anti-clubbing language that's handled in the CA.
And then my last comment on this is that you can tell a lot about a prospective buyer on how hard they negotiate back with you on your confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. Because if it has to go more than 2 turns, we usually advise our clients this is going to go nowhere. Because you need to get a sense that we're trying to, like in this process, and if these are people selling their business, you want to protect your information. And if you see a buyer going and making outrageous demands at the confidentiality stage, they're probably not the right people to be in business with.
You also have to be careful for the people who just sign it like, yeah, because they might not take it seriously. But I completely agree with that point. And we've basically had to shut people down at the NDA stage because it's a really excellent indicator of how people are going to behave in the negotiation. I'm going to come back to that example that I gave earlier where we sent teasers to something like 125 private equity funds. We had signed non-disclosure agreements with 75 parties. 75 parties had a look at the CIM. And when, at the time the NDA was signed, the counterparty still didn't know the identity of our client. But I'm not going to tell you how we did it. I'm going to leave that. If you want to know how we did it, come up and see me after, and I'll tell you how we did it.
Was it enforceable?
Yes. So
I guess Paris is a lawyer too.
Yeah, no, we have some excellent counsel. So anyway, that's the NDA. But the NDA also sort of provides theoretical protection because in the end, very difficult to enforce an NDA. All right, in terms of the information memorandum, so I assume, and I don't want to get into too much detail on that, but the information memorandum is basically enough information for a bidder to formulate the key risks around the business, get a handle on what the financials look like, and potentially build a forecast. If it's a private equity fund, they're always going to want to be able to build a financial forecast. So you want to make sure in the CIM, particularly if you have financial buyers, there's enough information in there for them to build a forecast on the company.
So Paris, just on that again, I would never want a vendor to rely on a buyer to do his forecasting. You know, the concept of time, which was on the previous slide, if you want to shorten the time frame, make sure that you have the information, that you already know what the buyer is going to be looking for, and you got to be ahead of the game on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just be proactive, not reactive. You get in a lot of trouble, and that's where the leaks happen.
Yeah, I can tell you that we do a lot of sell-side support with other investment bankers when a deal gets broken, so that, you know, a financial diligence is done and they can't make heads or tails of it. It really extends the timeline and adds incredible deal risk.
One of the other practices that's less common in Canada or the US, but it's common in Europe, and you tend to see it with larger businesses, is that the vendor will go out and retain its own financial, tax, legal advisors and put together a comprehensive financial diligence report, a comprehensive tax report, a comprehensive legal due diligence report, package it up and say, here's your box of risk. You've only got 10 days to get in and out of the data room, and we've bridged that timetable for you. Problem with that is most buyers tend to want to do their own confirmatory due diligence in any event, and it's quite expensive to try to put that together and identify the issues, which might be unique to the buyer.
I think you really have to be confident in your advisors that you're going to get the results. We do the sell-side facilitation reports because, you know, they're not really, you still require a buyer to do confirmatory, but I see in Canada and the US that vendors tend not to take the risk as much, but it is, in Europe, it's common practice.
Yep.
So there are various gates, if you will, that the bidder has to jump through to get each of these incremental levels of disclosure. So you want a teaser. In our case, we'd say, you know, I want some indication that it's actually a fit for you through a verbal conversation. You want the information memorandum, and we need a signed NDA. You want to get access to management? Send us in a bid, okay? Send us an indicative offer of what you think the company's worth if you want that access. Okay, you've now had access to management, and you've had a look at it, maybe a fairly light data room. You want to look at something more detailed, then we might want you to send in a check-in bid. Okay, so in the US, it's pretty common practice to have 3 rounds of bidding now, okay, where you have an initial indication of interest, you have a check-in bid after the management presentation and a couple weeks in a light data room. After they've met management and what have you, they got a lot better picture of the company, whether they like management or whatnot. And if the check-in bid doesn't come in at a level that you like, then you can shut them off and you don't have to continue disclosing more information. What is a check-in bid? It's a second round bid. So it would be a refresh of the initial indication of interest after the company has had a look through a fairly light data room and met management, okay? But before they go into the really deep due diligence, reading the leases, looking at the customer contracts, the really, really sensitive stuff, okay?
In Paris, maybe it's funny, a lot of our, I would say, medium-sized enterprises and smaller enterprises think selling a business is like selling their house in real estate. So they're always dumbfounded that there's no deposits being put forward. And I think, you know, when you mentioned check-in bid, I was thinking check. You know, am I getting a check when they make the offer? And I think it's important to understand, especially, you know, not that it doesn't happen, that people will make good faith offers with deposits, but it's rare that that happens.
That's right.
And I think entrepreneurs should be prepared that is not, like, when you start asking for that, you start to take yourself as an outlier in the market, and you never want to be perceived as a vendor to be someone who's asking demands outside of the normal course.
Yeah. And not only that, you don't have a form purchase and sale agreement. You have a highly negotiated purchase and sale agreement, and you probably have 3 or 4 or 5 other major ancillary agreements depending on the structure of the transaction.
Yeah, if you got an earnout, that can be like a whole other purchase agreement. It can be longer than the purchase agreement.
So somewhere around that point where you've got your check-in bid, somebody's going to sort of rise above everybody else and ask for a period of exclusivity. How long is that period usually, and what occurs during it?
Well, the answer is no. If someone's asking for the exclusivity, but if you extend exclusivity, the answer is as short as possible, and I know that's not the specific answer you want, but I want to set it up that way first. It's generally, I think, a pretty bad idea to offer someone. They'll often ask for 60 days. Okay, 60 days exclusivity. If you're going to give someone 60 days exclusivity, you want to make pretty sure they're active. You want to make sure they aren't just holding you off the market, letting all the other bidders get cold so they can have their way with you, okay? So you need to make sure they keep moving. So if you're going to offer exclusivity, we always recommend that you have specific milestones, okay? I'm not going to grant you 60 days blanket exclusivity. I'm going to offer you 15 days to clear this requirement. You want to have a look at the customer contracts? Fine. You confirm that you have reviewed this to your satisfaction within 15 days, and I want you to confirm that you've met this requirement by day 30, and you've gone through. I want to see at least 2 turns of the definitive agreement by day 45, et cetera. Okay, so you can hold them to a timeline. So really bad idea to offer someone long exclusivity without having them ante up with some action. Okay, so a staged exclusivity is a really good idea. Again, more hoops. Okay, hope that answers your question. Yes.
Dealt with individual strategic buyers. In a multiple buyer situation, can buyers know what the other offers are?
No. Terrible idea. Yeah, because of course, what are they going to do? The other guy plus one. You play the prices right. Yeah, I'm sorry. The question was, if you have multiple bidders, is there ever a case where the other bidders know what each other are bidding? Is that fair? Yeah.
Yes, or is it for a strategic move whereby it's suggested to a buyer where they need to come in at?
Yeah. Oh, so price. So is it advisable? It must be impossible to hear through that giant pillar right in the middle of the room. So the other question is it ever advisable to give price guidance? Right? Like, is it ever advisable to say, okay, you're a little low, come up another 7 million and you're in the race? Is that advisable? Yeah, I mean, you can do. We have the latitude, and that's where having an agent's a really good idea, because this is what we do all day long. What you want to do ideally is you have people come along through a process where they have really no visibility on where everyone else is coming in. Once you see the lay of the land, that's when the investment banker really earns their money, and that's when they come along. I've had situations where I had 2 bidders come in at a dead tie, and I called them both up and said, I normally wouldn't do this, but I have to tell you, you were actually in a dead tie with another party, so I'm going to give you 48 hours. If you want to, I'm not telling you what to do. If you think you would like to revise your bid, I want to give you that opportunity. Okay, so there are a whole bunch of ways that you can play that. You might want to do something where you say, sure, if you come up, you're out of the running, so see you later. You might want to invite a little bit of discussion around price and say, if you're just about 13 million higher, you would have been in the running, but you're a little light. Those kind of discussions, yeah, that's helpful. But you definitely don't want to give people the picture of the field. And the other thing that's really important, and I know it makes it sound like, well, just lie to everybody. That'll be great. Get the best price for your client. We don't. Okay, we don't do that because our reputation is incredibly important. Our credibility is incredibly important. That's our negotiating currency. And so if we run around lying to people and you can't believe anything we say ever, we're not really going to be able to do a proper job for our client. But there's a way to frame the lay of the land that is truthful, that gives the right sort of level of disclosure, so that people sort of have a sense of whether they're out of the running. So a lot of times that discussion will go something like, "Hi Harry, yeah, so you're a little light, so we aren't going to move forward with you in the process." And they will usually ask for a little bit of feedback. Oh, okay, what was the issue? And we can see if they kind of chase us a little bit. I wouldn't just call up and say, if you come up $13 million, you're in the next round. So we kind of invite a little dialogue there.
How do we know that the advisor is truly getting the best price?
Yeah, how do you know if you're true? So the question was, for those on the other side of the giant cement pillar, is how do you know as a seller you're actually getting the best possible price? And the answer is, have a good competitive process. If you have a really good competitive process and competent advisors, you will make sure that you've had a first look at everybody's best bid, and if your advisors are really good, they might be able to squeeze a little bit more. Okay, so the key ingredient to bake that cake is to make sure you got a lot of competition. Okay.
I think it's important, it's a good question, is that, again, you have to make a market. There is no market for private companies. There's no listing I can go and, for my house, we're using the real estate example, I can go on MLS, I can look at 3 houses in the reasonable proximity in my neighborhood. It's easy to get a sense of the value. Here, the advisor has to make a market, and how we make a market, which is outside of the context of our discussion today, is by contacting third parties who would buy it. The other thing on which I thought was interesting when listening to this discussion is vendors sometimes already know who they want to buy their business, and they're constantly disappointed, and they almost signal to the buyer, I really want it to be you or you, and then the buyer knows that and is underbidding. And I had one situation where the vendor was like, I can't believe I'm getting lowballed by the guy who should buy my business. And it's because you told them that you want, like, it was so simple.
Right.
And so this process, the integrity of having this advisor is to keep the entrepreneurs from doing the direct negotiating. And that really is in my experience, how you're going to get the best value for your business.
Yeah.
But you really do have to create a market that, remember, and that's why it takes so long to start, from start to end, is you have to actually create a market that does not exist.
Yeah. If you've got a competitive process and you're down to the late stages, and you've got multiple bids, 2 or 3 bids, price is one variable, then you're going to start to look at what else is there. And you got to look at what I'll call the non-quantitative items or the qualitative items. What's the consideration? How quick am I getting it? How much holdback, escrow, earnout? How much is contingent? How much is real dough at closing, on game day? What's my liability profile? And so when you get to that late stage and you're looking at price, then you've got to start comparing some of these other elements that really factor into the overall deal. And going back to whether you give exclusivity or not, you better differentiate yourself on both of those aspects, both the purchase price and real purchase price, not contingent, and what your indemnity profile looks like.